while you're all getting back to your seats, let me invite the panelists, distinguished panelists of the first plenary session, Great India Debate on Basic Income. Ms. Renana Jhabvala, Dr. Shiva Kumar, Mr. Ajay Vir Jakhar, Dr. Guy Standing, and Dr. Bhaskara Rao. Please come onto the stage. Let me briefly introduce each of the panelists. Ms. Renana Jhabvala is the chair of Seva Bharat. Most of you would know Self-Employed Women's Association, which has done path-breaking work in terms of organizing and mobilizing and providing a voice to the women in the informal sector. They have, its history of 40 years, they have had many breakthroughs, many innovations, and they brought many new ideas into the trade union movement itself in India. Renana has also been the person behind the basic income pilot in India, and she has been the spirit to get the whole thing going. Dr. Shiva Kumar, during the time of the pilot, was in an advisory role in UNICEF. He is currently the chair of International Center for Human Development and also teaches widely in most prestigious institutions like Harvard and India Business School. And he has played a very, very critical role in getting UNICEF associated with us, with Seva, to get the pilot going, and a strong supporter of basic income. And Mr. Ajay Vir Jakhar, it's very difficult to introduce him because he's many persons rolled into one. If you go to his blog, he says that he's a farmer, which he is. At the same time, he is a scholar. He writes quite extensively and brings in very, very interesting take on question of farmers. The way it is discussed in India, there's a lot of frustration in that, but I think he brings in a fresh perspective and still optimistic in a situation which is extremely bleak. And he's also the chair of the Farmers Forum and also the Farmers Commission appointed by Punjab government. Dr. Guy Standing, you must be wondering why Guy Standing is sitting here on the India Day. But Guy was like an apostle who brought the gospel of basic income to India. So he was the first one at a time when nobody was talking about it. He has been working with Seva for a long time, and he never pushed the idea of basic income on anyone. But people get inspired by the way he writes, by the way he speaks, and by the way he works with us. So I have learned everything that I have learned about basic income from Guy. More importantly, learning about basic income, about why it is important. Why it is important for people. So Guy has been the economist, the statistician, and the political scientist behind the study. And he's an economist and I'm a sociologist, but somehow we managed to survive the entire study and learned from each other. That's a great thing. Now, Dr. Bhaskara Rao is a development economist and worked extensively on agriculture, also with the non-governmental organizations, and wide variety of experience he has within the civil society organizations, and at the same time, in the government bodies. He has done quite a lot of work within the government. With that introduction, we will start. The way we will do this session is in a traditional way, because each of them have their own very strong take on what is the relevance of basic income in India, what is the story of basic income in India. It's a global idea. Basic income is a global idea, but it's the local context that actually plays it out. So we have local dilemmas. We have local excitements. We have local discourses. So the idea of basic income has to fit into the ongoing discourses, particularly on poverty. In India, poverty is the elephant sitting in the drawing room, and you cannot talk about basic income without talking about poverty. So it got stitched into the poverty discourse, poverty alleviation discourse. May I request Ms. Renana Jhabvala to start the...
Thank you, Sarath. It's difficult to talk after that very inspiring speech by Mr. P.D. Rai and the video, which affected us, I think. But I'd like to, since this is about the great Indian debate, and many of you have come from outside India, I'd like to say a few words about India. You must have been hearing about the growth story in India. We grow at 7%, 6%, 8% we had been growing. And so, in a way, India is seen as a country with a lot of growth. And it is true that a lot of people have been lifted out of abject poverty due to this growth. But what we don't hear now so much, you hear about the billionaires, but what we don't really hear about that much is that about 50% of the population, although not in abject subsistence poverty, are struggling and are poor. They're struggling with life and they are poor. And one of the reasons for that is that we have a poor social security system. Work is insecure. 50% of people in India are self-employed. 90% are in the informal economy. So, and nevertheless, even with such an insecure employment system, we don't really have a good social security system which could support all these millions and millions of people who are working, which is strange because government spends anywhere between 6 to 7 lakh crores, which translates to about $100 billion every year on social security. And yet, not that much of it reaches the 50%, which are below the lower 50% in terms of income. Why is this? Well, there are many schemes. Any one village will receive over 350 schemes, 350 schemes, which are supposed to help especially the poor. There's a problem with all these schemes. A, they run parallelly. B, they're all conditional. C, they're all targeted. It has built up a system of middlemen, and corruption, so that most of this money, that $100 billion, is really not reaching down. This has been concerning my organization, which is a trade union, Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA. And in the last 10 years, we've had anywhere between 1.5 million to 2 million, it varies every year, members. And these members are women in the informal economy whose work is insecure, who earn very little, and who have very little access to social security. So we have, over the years, been trying to work with the government, with government schemes, to get social security for them. And we do keep experimenting for what is good for our members, and we believe that what's good for our members is good for that lower 50% of our population. Sarath talked about Guy Standing bringing the word of basic income to India, and it's true, but it's not true that he doesn't push it on you. We have worked with Guy Standing since 2000, I think almost since 2000. And from 2000 onwards, he's been talking about basic income, and we said, yes, very good. But then, as we were experimenting with many, or thinking about and being frustrated that why our members, in spite of government, so many schemes, why our members are not able to get social security. So we finally invited him, and that was good 6, 7, 8 years later, that, all right, you have so many ideas about basic income, why don't you present it to our board and to the younger people in our organization? And finally, I think must have been 2009 or 2008, Guy Standing gave a presentation, and we were quite surprised at the enthusiasm with which a lot of people picked it up. And what we decided was, well, let's try and run some kind of pilot. The first pilot we ran, because we were able to convince the government of Delhi to let us run a pilot where people had been getting food, but instead of food, they would get cash, and then some people would continue to get food, and we will do a study against the people who were getting food against the people who were getting cash. To our surprise, there was huge opposition. There was rallies against us doing a small experiment. There was sit-ins, demonstrations, you should not be doing this. You can't do an experiment. And it went to the point where some of our people were actually beaten up, and we had to call the police. But we persisted, and at the end of it, we found that those people who received the income as opposed to the food did much better. And then that encouraged us. And then thanks to UNICEF and Shiva Kumar, we were able to do a much bigger study in villages, which was a true basic income. In that it was universal, it was cash, and it was individual and unconditional. So this ended in 2012. We were again surprised. And up till now, we had not really believed that basic income can be the solution. But then in 2012, we saw that basic income can have a transformative effect. And so we began to believe. It took us a long time to actually believe that basic income is a wonderful thing. And though our experiment ended in 2012, we did another study in 2017 and found to our amazement that even 1 year of basic income does tend to lift people, maybe not completely out of poverty, but into a new sphere of life. As you will hear later with the other speakers, and which you heard from P.D. Rai, in fact, basic income has become a talking point in India. In the last election, each political party did talk about some form of basic income. Now, where are we going in the future? It's been a very short journey, as you can imagine. As I said, we started with Guy presenting in 2009. Our first experiment was 2010. Second experiment ended in 2012, and we are only in 2019. So within a span of 10 years, we have gone from total disbelief to a lot of discussion. Where do we go from here? I guess nobody really knows, but I would like to present two scenarios that are happening. Firstly, it's possible that it will come to India in some way with a bang. What P.D. Rai presented to you was a possibility of one state of India just taking up basic income universally. It's possible another state might want to take it up. It's even possible that at some point the government will want to experiment with it. So it's possible to come with a bang, but that's a possibility in the future. What is already happening is incremental. In India, as I said, those 350 schemes neither gave cash, they gave food or services or labor. They did not give cash. They were conditional. They were targeted. And they did not go to the individual, but usually went to the family. Slowly, that is changing. Many schemes have changed to cash. This has been possible because we now have almost universal bank accounts, because we have a way of transfer from bank to bank, which we did not have even 10 years ago. And so suddenly in India, this change has happened, that many of the services or labor that was given now is turning into cash. That's one. Secondly, unconditionality. Unconditionality has happened in many cases. So cash to farmers, cash to old people. So that way, they don't have to prove anything except that they're a farmer, which is not difficult to prove. So and they don't have to satisfy any conditions. So unconditionality also has been creeping in, as has the individuality. Targeting is still there. And so what we see is an incremental approach towards basic income. And what I really believe is that in the future, these increments will converge and turn into a true basic income. We still have a lot of work to do. We have formed, thanks to Sarath, a Indian network for basic income, or rather, Indian network for basic income. And we want to give this idea, bring this idea to more and more people. And so I would like especially to invite those who engage with India or who are from India to take this idea and take it to young people, take it to politicians, and let us have much more discussion, many, many more experiments, many more pilots, and let us bring this idea further and further up into the Indian discourse. And I really do believe that sometime in the future, whether it is with a big bang in some of the states, or whether it is incremental within the next 10, 15 years, we will see basic income in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Renana Ben. Now may I request Dr. Shiva Kumar to share his thoughts.
Good morning and welcome to all of you, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation on universal basic income, focusing on India. I'll begin by making three sets of comments. One is following what Renana said, just to give you a backdrop of the context, the political context within which, and the economic context within which we are discussing universal basic income in India. Second, I would like to flag some of the, I would argue, settled debates. At least from my point of view, they are settled and they're no longer questions that I reflect upon on the issue of basic income. And lastly, I would want to also flag some unresolved questions that we need to address. I think Renana did a very good job of pointing out that India's growth story presents a mixed picture of extraordinary success on one hand in terms of reducing the levels of poverty in India, both income poverty and multidimensional poverty. But that should not conceal the fact that this country still has a huge backlog of human deprivations, whether it is reflected in child survival, child malnutrition, water scarcity, environmental pollution, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And in fact, the concern that many of us have is that policymakers are quite mesmerized by the quantity of growth, whether it's 6%, 5%, 3%, and now we can't believe any number that is put out because we don't know what the true facts are in this era as in this post-truth era, as it is called. So we really don't believe these numbers. But we never reflect on the quality of growth. The quality of growth in the sense we need growth that creates jobs, growth that ensures equity, growth that promotes sustainable development, growth that is respectful of environment, growth that takes into account the context and cultures in which we are implementing policies. The second comment on the backdrop I want to say is that whenever we talk of basic income, it has to be discussed as an essential component of human security. And human security, as the term itself suggests and has evolved in the development literature, is about the security of people. And when we talk about human security and Indians in particular, I would like to focus on young people because I think the real strength of this country, as has often been pointed out, is the large youth population, 40% of the population being so young. And so what are the kinds of insecurities in the lives of young people that will be addressed by something like basic income? Or should basic income be introduced at all? So when you talk about young in India, I would like to say that economic insecurity among the young is at its peak. Never before have young people in India felt as threatened and as insecure about not being able to get a job. Mr. Rai talked about artificial intelligence displacing a lot of jobs. But that's not only, that's futuristic, but even at the moment, as we are speaking, India is facing a serious employment crisis. Unemployment is the highest in the last 25 years. Many companies are laying off people. Many sectors are shrinking. Our exports are not growing. And there is a real crisis in the manufacturing sector. Come to the agriculture sector. Yes, agriculture no longer contributes as much. It contributes only about 15-16% to India's GDP. But still, there is a crisis. There's a farming crisis. And the farming crisis is of two kinds. One is that young people, particularly young men, are no longer interested in working on the farms. You can go and talk to anybody, they're all migrating to the cities. So no, it's a real problem and a concern, who is really going to be the farmer of the future? They're not just, young people are not interested. The little bit of access to education, the opening up of the economy, the attraction of going to a city and leading the kinds of lives that we lead in the middle class, that is the aspiration of young people, so they're not there. So along with this job insecurity or the economic insecurity, when you're talking about the agricultural sector, there is another major emergency, which is the climate emergency affecting agriculture. And I think if this government or India is not recognizing the economic emergency, they're not even acknowledging the climate emergency. And story after story after story, you will be reading in the newspapers about how the climate change is creating extraordinary insecurity in the lives of young men. And so if you put these two together, then there is a very serious problem of economic insecurity in the lives of young people. Guy might know, when we were growing up, there used to be a joke among economists, is it a recession or a depression? So what is the difference between a recession and a depression? And the joke was that if your neighbor lost his job, that was recession. But if you lost your own job, that is depression. But that joke had an assumption in it that you had a job. But now you have no job. And so it's not about recession, it's not about depression, it's about frustration. And I think this frustration among young people, not being able to fulfill their aspiration just in terms of getting to do something, could threaten the social fabric of this country, could threaten the political stability of this country. And what we read about in other places of getting enticed by different kinds of initiatives to join these forces which are anti-social or anti-government and so on is a real possibility. So I think we have to frame the conversation on basic income to establish the urgency and the importance, at least in India, and I'm not talking about the foreign countries where there's another set of issues, that you cannot afford at this point of time, given where we are in terms of the economic policies, not taking us in creating jobs, and in terms of what we're not able to do anything about climate change, that it's a hugely urgent need. The third backdrop, again, I'll say, I'm not talking much about universal basic income because I guess you all know about it, so it's not worth explaining. The third important thing is another reality. It's the third reality. It's a medical reality. And the medical reality is this, that the changes in technologies that we are so proud of when it comes to cell phones and TVs and electronic media, digital world, that has reached extraordinary levels. The next revolution that we are going to see is in medical technologies, that we are going to find solutions to every disease in the world. A consequence of that is that today India's life expectancy is 68 years old. And my prediction is that for people who are young, that is who are in their 20s and 30s, their life expectancy is going to be 120. So they are young people in India are going to live to be 100, my generation is going to live to be 100. So I'm not at all worried that the generation that is in their 30s is going to live to be 120. So you have to put yourself in the position of a young person in India today who's not going to be allowed to die, who's going to definitely live to be 120 years old and worry about where the hell am I going to support myself. So that is the reality and the seriousness and the gravity of the situation within which we have to discuss basic income. Next, let me make some comments on universal basic income, and I think the benefits of cash transfers, universal unconditional cash grants, etc., have been well documented by Guy Steiner. But continuing the stream in which I am talking, I think we have to view it as a minimum economic security and as a basic right of every citizen. And that is the way one has to position it, that just like it is the obligation of the state to provide police protection against basic crime to all of us. It's understood. Similarly, when you're talking about economic security, in the case of physical security that the state has provided, it provides you police protection against basic harms. So economic security should be seen as basic protection against potential downside risks of not finding a job or not finding a livelihood. Second, I think the question on universalism is resolved. I think I don't see any debate on that. I think it has to be universal. We have gone through targeting in India in many, many different forms. It is complex. It is a corrupt society. The possibilities of corruption go up, and it is very controversial. Whom would you give it to and whom you won't give it to? And this kind of political patronage has to end. And I think the ending of political patronage itself is a big deal. And when you heard Mr. Rai, everybody, everything is about political patronage. I will give this kind of basic income. I'll give this. I'll give it to farmers. I'll give it to farmers. This one, that one. So it just becomes a game, and that's not the way to play it at all. Third, that universal basic income, and I think that is the position in India also among a lot of us, should not be seen as a poverty alleviation measure. But it must be seen in the as a broader element of a social security or social protection program. And what does this mean? And this is what many of us have been arguing, that handing out cash cannot address the problems of poverty. To an extent, it addresses the problems of low income. But low income is actually an outcome. And so you have to understand what are the underlying factors that result in somebody not being able to earn, and that is traced often to the unequal opportunities. So it's the opportunities to go to school, education, health, nutrition, and so on and so forth. So unless we focus on equity and creating equal opportunities, and in that sense, India is not only, there's a false sense of equality being created in the space of commodities, that everybody now dresses the same, whether it's a poor person or rich person, they're all wearing T-shirts and jeans. All the rich and the poor living in slums are using shampoos because it's now marketed to the bottom of the pyramid in 1 rupee or 5 rupee sachets. So everyone feels there's a sense of equality in the space of commodities, but they don't recognize the divergence in the space of opportunities. That there is a huge gap, emerging gap. It's not just the inequality of incomes that is widening in India, but there's also a huge divergence of opportunities when it comes to other aspects of life. Third, I also wanted to mention that cash, particularly in the Indian context, where the public provisioning of services, basic services, primary healthcare, primary education, access to water, etc., is not guaranteed or is not universally provided by the state, cash does not guarantee well-being. And I think this is something which I've always harped upon, that just because I get cash, it does not mean I can take that cash and get good quality health care. And that's an issue that I've often discussed with Guy and Renana, that when you see these benefits of cash being given, one of the prominent outcomes is they use it for health, they use it for private tuition, school, private education, and so on. And I have no reason to believe that private healthcare in India, which, as Professor Amartya Sen says, if you go to the private sector, you're stuck between quackery on one hand, where there are unqualified people, quacks dispensing medicine, and crookery at the other end. So you're stuck between quackery and crookery, where you don't know what you're being tested for and what you're doing. So when you have that kind of a system where the state has failed in providing basic social services, then cash may not really ensure conversion of income or cash into well-being. And this is a third point which follows from it, that the state should not divert spending on health, education to universal basic income. And that is a very strong stand I think all of us have taken here, that it is a universal basic income should complement and not substitute. So when Mr. Rai was saying, the finance minister says, I can institute the universal basic income, but I'll scrap everything else, that is really not acceptable. It is not acceptable. It is not there. And lastly, I think we have also agreed, I think, among ourselves, that it is important to acknowledge that not all benefits are best delivered in the form of cash. And I think a good example of that in India is the midday meals, which are the free hot-cooked meals that are served in schools, and many, many other such schemes that do have positive benefits when delivered in kind. So when this debate is often posited versus cash versus kind, it is not really that it is both, and where there is an opportunity, we should do it. And lastly, I'll conclude by flagging a few concerns that have been raised, and these are still open to debate. First is, there are some problems with giving cash. And I think these are very practical problems, especially when you find cash given in the hands of very poor people who are both financially illiterate, particularly financially illiterate is the point I would make, that cash can be misused, cash gets cornered, and there are a large number of predatory commercial interests. And there are these things called chit schemes. I don't know how many of you have heard of those chit schemes, where somebody will go and sell you a fantastic proposal that you give me 100 rupees every month, and at the end of so many months, this money will multiply 5-fold, 10-fold returns you will get. And story after story we hear of these. It's like the Ponzi schemes which keep crashing at the end of it. So one has to be very careful. How do you do that? Second is, what should be the amount of money that people should get? It obviously should not be so ridiculously small, and that's the debate that has been going on. There should be some moral basis for announcing a minimum income, and that should be, in fact, sometimes I use the word basic income or minimum income I find problematic. It has to be a universal essential income. An essential income, not a minimum income, an essential income that guarantees you a standard of living. Having said that we need to have an essential amount, indexation has to be built into it. And one thing that we never do in the government here is to index anything. So you have pension schemes that were announced 15 years ago, and that same 250 rupees or 300 rupees, which was announced at that time, continues in perpetuity. So I think these are all questions that we need to discuss. And but let me conclude by saying that there is absolutely no doubt that we need the universal basic income in India at this point of time. People have to wake up, governments have to wake up, society has to wake up, that the crisis among young people is serious, and that this might be a very sensible way of averting an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a political crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiv. I think we'll have next Mr. Ajay Vir Jakhar.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to have this opportunity to participate and learn on basic income, especially to be on stage with such luminaries. It's an honor. Thank you so much to the conference. Bharat Krishak Samaj, the farmers' organization I work with, advocates for farmer prosperity. And like everyone else, we have taken a heavy ideological endowment from our environment, from where we come from, leading to viewpoints and a matter of differences in priorities, but also points to different worldviews altogether. I will try and articulate on cash transfers from the farmer's point of view and try and play the devil's advocate to the idea that we discussed today. Struggle over how losses and gains from state action are allocated in the food farming sector is what can be termed food politics. Farmers have been at the receiving end of the stick as far as food politics has been concerned, to the extent that there is a crisis of confidence and there is great distrust in the farming community with the government in India. And I think so that holds true today, especially with low commodity prices across the developed world, whether it be in Germany, whether it be in the US or in other places. In society, perception has an equally important bearing on people's demands, as empirical evidence presented in this conference may lead to different conclusions. Therefore, when farmers are clubbed with everyone else in what we call universal, it is very difficult to digest. For having been made the tools of mitigating inflation for so many decades, it's difficult to believe that we do not deserve something special and have lost faith in the system because the system has been failing us. Quite more often, when I say this, I am asked, are poor farmers any different from the other poor people? And it's a valid question that gets us to this point of basic income. Who is a farmer? I think it's a very complex question, and definition is very tricky, and it includes a lot of occupations which could be called farmers, different levels of identity of a person. Stresses at any given time varies according to the context when they're identifying themselves. And normally, identity or an allegiance is always defined in opposition to something. So farmers will uniformly, I think, so define their occupation or identity as against consumers, as against the rest of the society. And those perceptions, that environment builds into what we think and we speak today. Politics is seldom a source of profound change. More often, it is a response to a particular moment. And that is why you will see India's new national government, which is in place now, along with, in the run-up to the elections, along with other political parties, talked about cash transfers, talking about sustaining farmer livelihoods, and to do away with agrarian distress, direct benefit transfer schemes related to cultivation support, related to income augmentation, or direct income, or even PM Kisan, which was announced for landholding farmers in India, was a consequence that the various political parties saw that farming had been depressed and in recession, and a combination and agreement of both, that they had to do these. These developments point to an emerging consensus that government policy should focus on ensuring adequate farmer incomes to address agrarian distress. This is also, I think, so the first step towards basic income, because cash transfers has become a reality, and it has incepted the seed into the normal public's mind that this is something that is possible. Most farmer families today sustain themselves on non-farm income, and a non-farm income component in their total income, and that therefore identifying particular occupations of people become very difficult. Measuring poverty is even more complex, and that is one of the many reasons to believe that principles of universal basic income will look after these apprehensions and find solutions for us. But while designing social benefit programs which require a transfer of funds in one form, as we are talking now, we also need to focus on principles of a society. For example, China has adopted an approach emphasizing the greatest good for the greatest number rather than the moral imperative to protect individual rights. While codes of principles written in the West tend to focus on fairness, transparency, individual rights, privacy, and accountability. And this goes to the heart of designing welfare programs. This also goes to the heart of discussing the Aadhaar that we have in India, which will allow for distribution, allow for use as a basic income tool. Some people do not want it to be used, so it's not that simple. The debate is not settled, and I think so. These are issues that the Indian people or even the policymakers are still grappling with. Even the academicians are grappling with. Where do you draw the line between these two philosophies? Everything has a cost, whatever we are going to do, but could not. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change clearly identifies agriculture as contributing to 35% of human-induced greenhouse gases, and calls for changes whereby agriculture can become a solution rather than a problem for the future generations. Given a choice, I would say that we need to pay for ecosystem services, and that requires repurposing of agriculture subsidies. When you talk about agriculture subsidies, normally we add subsidies of food to it. Normally we add fertilizer, electricity, and various other kinds of subsidies. Now, as a farmer, we are apprehensive that when we look at a basic income, will these subsidies be taken away from the community? And that is the greatest threat we feel. Also, when we discuss universal basic income and other discussions in India, when most farmer organizations, I would say most, if not all, there could be one or two organizations which don't do this, but what I find generally when I deal with farmer organizations is farmer organizations in India never discuss mobilization of resources to pay for social services. And as a farmers organization, I think it is very important. It's not that money is limited or unlimited, but we need to look at resource mobilization as a part of not only this discussion of universal basic income, but all discourse in India must include. Should India have higher taxes for the rich? Should we have wealth tax? Should we have estate duty? Should we have debt tax? And these are basic questions that must be raised at all venues, because if there's going to be no resources, then what is there going to be to distribute to the people? And that should become a part of all discussions. And definitely today there are not enough resources to give agriculture input subsidies or and obviously we are talking about repurposing of subsidies, not in the way they're giving now, or for using for universal basic income or for other services they may be required. So so questions remain open if targeted incomes or with conditionality transfers, are they better tools? Of course, basic income has advantages of administrative efficiency. It has been correctly summarized that income transfers bypasses limitations posed by targeting errors. And I completely agree that track record of targeting in India for the poor and welfare programs suffers both from inclusion and exclusion, as has been clearly identified in the background note. And it is also wrong to say that the poor will spend money or cash for unintended purposes. Normal arguments when you go about this in policymakers is that they will go and buy liquor for it, they'll go buy alcohol for it. And it's the most ridiculous argument that the most educated people will give in India. There also is a deep moral question that social care fails if it is designed only for the average recipient, or if the rich and the poor are going to receive the same amount. So that's something that also needs to be seen. We are delighted that we could come here together. And I think discussing in groups comes up with more ideas. More importantly, when we are invited to debate and dissent, we arrive, as I have done, with a box full of ideas, ready to discard some and weave the rest together. A good meeting is a good meeting, less because of what happens in the meeting itself, but more because of what comes before, and more importantly, what comes after the meeting. Don't get me wrong that I'm not against basic income, but I think the progression of where we are today, which is a lot forward when we were 5 years ago, needs to be planned, designed, and marketed properly. I think all three things need to go continuously in like a set jigsaw puzzle. Optimism and pessimism both have their merits, but right now we need a dose of realism. Confucius had talked about the best of best options. I think there are no right options. There are only better options, there are better solutions, and that also will depend based on a combination of data, perceptions, environment, our circumstances, our fears, and our experiences. And those are very important. And before I end, I would only want to say that when God was doling out qualities, tactfulness certainly did not fall on the farmer's lot. So with that, I would say that thank you so much for your patience, and I look forward to hearing and learning from this experience and taking it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajay. Now I request Dr. Standing, Guy Standing.
It's a pleasure to be an honorary Indian. I have so many Indian friends that I can claim to be that. I've been working on and off in India for over 40 years, so I've grown to love India. The only time I do not love India is when we're battling it out in the cricket field, a test match, but we'll leave that aside. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this has been a long journey and it's a continuing one. And I was reflecting, looking at the pictures, the photos in our book on our pilots, and each of those photos brought back a certain memory. But what I'd like to do by way of beginning is to acknowledge that well over 100 people have been involved in doing our pilot work, and we have the privilege of having 4 of them sitting in the front row, and I'd like to acknowledge them. But before I do so, I would like to tell you that the most common word used in our pilot works over the 5 years that we spent doing the work was a very strange 3-letter word. It was Ben. Ben. And it means sister. And Bai is brother. And of course, I was always called Guy Bai. And all of the women members in our project, who were the majority, were called Ben. So I would like to acknowledge, first of all, my great friend and mentor in some respects, Sheikha Ben there, who has been a really strong, solid sister helping us with the project work in Madhya Pradesh, and also Mango Ben, who is there, and Redada Ben and Rajmani Ben. And I'd like you to stand up because you have done so much work over the period. Please stand up, all of you. Now, over the years in which we've been working in India, when we were designing the project, to start with, Renana has mentioned the speech I gave in Ahmedabad in 2008. And I remember all the senior members of SEWA with whom I've been working for many years. And those of you who don't know about SEWA, SEWA is a fantastic organization. I think it's the biggest organization of women in the world, has over 1.7 million members, most of whom are very low income, struggling to survive in urban and rural areas. And the work that SEWA has done has just been phenomenal over this period. And it's a pleasure to acknowledge that I've been working humbly with them over that period because I have great admiration for SEWA. Well, when we had that first meeting, it was very interesting. If Renana is strictly honest, which is on her better days, she will acknowledge that it was the elder members, the leaders, Elabat, Renana, Mirai, who were all a little skeptical at the time. And I was really worried when I was proposing that we should be doing work on basic income. And suddenly, all the young leaders there, women from various villages, stood up and say, we should be doing it. And I really was impressed by that. A second event happened, which I will always recall. I was very worried that we were going to lose the debate on conditionality. I was very worried that senior politicians, very senior politicians, and the economic advisory boards were going to push us to do conditionality, and funders. We were working with DFID for a while. And we had a meeting in a very plush hotel in Delhi, discussing the design of the pilots that we were planning. And it was very interesting because all these senior politicians and bureaucrats were saying, oh, you have to have conditionality. These people will be wasting the money unless there are conditions. And I think it was Renana who had a moment of inspiration to have arranged for 2 train loads of women leaders from villages, one from Bihar and I think the other was from MP, to come to that meeting. It was very bizarre if you imagine it in a plush hotel. These women had all come by train overnight, and I thought we were going to lose the debate. And I was feeling very depressed sitting there at the end of the table. And suddenly one of the women, whose name I will not mention, Shika, Ben, suddenly she was talking to one of the others and stood up and said, do you think you know better what to do for my child than I do? And it was almost visible that you saw all these senior bureaucrats and politicians sinking in their seats. They all suddenly became much smaller. And after that, we had no problems. It was going to be unconditional. And it's little things like that that you remember, because we had the same problem with the idea that it should be individual. Basic income should be the same for a man and for a woman. And for a while, I was very worried because we were under 2 pressures. One pressure was, no, it should be for the family, the household. That was very common, it's widespread, it's the norm in India, etc. I was against that. Then, of course, there were others who were saying, no, 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 it should be just for women, just for women. That one actually worried me more because I thought there was going to be much more support just for women. I could not argue, being a man and being a foreigner, for the position that I wanted, which was individual, equal men and women. But fortunately, there were several women from Sewa who then stood up and said, no, 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 it should be equal. It should be for a man and it should be for a woman. We should have our equal amounts. Again, I was very, very pleased that that won us the debate. It was that, the women's voice, and particularly as we went through, often young women's voices that counted. And I think that this point was made in our wonderful inaugural speech this morning, that in India, as in every part of the world, the debate on basic income is going to be won by the young and particularly by women. And when we did our pilots, one of the wonderful things which we brought out in the book is that a lot of women felt emancipated by having their own individual basic income. It wasn't a lot. We know that. We would have liked to have paid more. But in fact that a woman, a young woman, had some cash where she didn't have cash before, had an emancipatory effect, giving her the capacity to say no, and giving her the capacity to feel confident that she was an individual herself. And that, of course, is always a vital part of our debate on basic income. And that goes with the feeling that why we put the picture of this disabled woman on the front cover of the book. This woman, at the beginning of the pilot, was the sort of person who is always last in the queue in a family to receive food. She would always have been the last in the family to receive medical attention because she was the least likely to be able to bring in money for the family. She was, in effect, an invisible woman. And the very fact that during the course of the pilot, they pooled money within the family to enable her to buy a sewing machine and enabled her to become a seamstress and an individual as a member of the community, struck me as a wonderful outcome of the pilot. And it's that sort of little thing which doesn't come out of the macro stories that we often tell each other and share. Those individual things about individual emancipation and dignity that comes with having basic income security. Now, what I've seen in the course of working in India is the first phase when we were talking about basic income in the early part of this century. The most hostile reception we received was from the extreme left, from the Communist Party, from older members, economist friends included, economist friends I'd known from Cambridge days when I was doing my PhD. They were the most hostile and resistant to the very thought that if you gave people cash, that would be something to be seriously considered. The number of insults I had to put up with, and not just me, but we experienced. And we also were dismissed by the Congress Party leadership. And I remember that Sonia Gandhi herself was initially very dismissive. But after the pilot results started to come in, some of those people, including her, and including some senior members in the Congress Party, suddenly started treating it with respect. Treating the whole debate with respect. It was too late for them. They were about to be washed away. And the new government, we had several members who secretly or privately were saying to us that they supported it. Familiar names in Indian politics. But they didn't have the courage. Arvind Subramanian's Chapter 9 of the economic report of the finance minister that has been mentioned several times in January 2017 certainly legitimized basic income in India. Here was a mainstream report by a cabinet minister submitted to Parliament. That was a significant event. And I think it helped change the tone. And as other speakers have mentioned, during the course of this general election that's just passed, if we're honest, we will look back on it and say, Narendra Modi was bound to win. It was a shoo-in. It was his second term. It was destined to be that way. I think the Congress Party could have done much better. The regional parties could have done much better. But I think we should not be too downhearted. And that's why I appreciated the final set of remarks that you made. And I want to end by reminding non-Indians, as well as my Indian friends here and following us, a basic income in India of a modest level, say 500 rupees per person, an adult, per month, is eminently affordable without being any threat to good public services. In India today, federal government, the central government, spends something like 8 or 9% of GDP on regressive subsidies. Fact. It spends millions and millions of dollars or rupees on regressive social policies that don't stand up to a moment's scrutiny by any objective analysis. The PDS, the public distribution system, which gives out rationed food and some other things in some places, it's been estimated that of all the money spent on it, several prime ministers have admitted it, 93% of the money goes to waste. It never reaches the poor. 93%. Now, whether you quibble it's 93% or 83%, you realize it's a disgraceful waste of money. And worse than that, as our surveys in Gujarat and in Madhya Pradesh and in Delhi show, it is not even progressive in the way it's actually spent, than 7% that does go to the poor. The least likely to receive help are the poorest. We know this. It's not science, it's known. And yet they've continued with this corrupt scheme. And it is corrupt. It's easier for a foreigner to say these things than it is for an Indian. The same with Narega. Narega, for me, has been a workfare scheme that has dissipated vast sums of money. Middlemen, low-level politicians have taken a lot of that money that's been spent on it. There are ways in which we can find the money to move in the direction of a basic income, and we should not be frightened by those who take out an envelope and write on the back of the envelope 1.4 billion people multiplied by 500 multiplied by 12. That's a lie. It's pathetic, but we're still seeing it being done. I believe it's affordable. I believe it is essential. I believe that a basic income in India would be more transformative than in any place I know well, because it gives people security, it gives people freedom, it gives people more economic dynamism, it gives people more sense of dignity, and essentially it's something that India will be getting within the next 10 years, I predict. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Now, Dr. Bhaskara Rao will share his thoughts.
I am relatively new to this idea of basic income. When my friend Sarath introduced me this idea, I readily accepted. Actually, I was thinking on that lines only for several years, more than 10 years or something like that. In my writings, all this, I used to advisory of this cash transfers. In India, this is essential because of my logic is simple. In India, perhaps most of the countries have the same situation. The head of the department, any department you take, either agriculture or industry or aviation, any department, is not a domain expert. Second person is a bureaucrat, is also not a domain expert. The third person is normally is a domain expert, but he doesn't have the opportunity to exercise his wisdom. That is the situation in Indian governance system. At the same time, the people are so clever, so organized people. For example, Indians only, you can see, from the same system has gone out and they are managing Google and Microsoft like companies. Whereas if you give them some money, many people object, will they be able to manage this $10 or $15? That is the reason I readily accepted this to join this movement. Basic income I am in support. Fortunately, I worked in, I will present some ideas in Telangana, the very state where we are sitting, Telangana state. In India, this is the state where so much caste-related programs are being implemented and replicated by many other states, including Government of India. It is appreciated by many, these programs. I somehow worked 2-3 years in this system and able to see this making of these policies and their implementation. I will present my observations of these systems. Briefly, this is a small state recently formed in 2014. This state was formed, 122,000 square kilometers, 35 million people, 8.4 million households. This you can see that most of the people are vulnerable, and also there's so many inequalities could be seen in sector-wise, communities-wise, region-wise. The GDP, the figures you can, I will share this. You can see these figures. Then these are some welfare schemes implemented recently by this for last 4-5 years. This government. This basically welfare schemes are there as Guy is described. Mostly is not so very good schemes and which didn't deliver any substantial gains also. This one expert recently called it, India has already reached the welfare state tag without creating first place the adequate wealth. Traditional welfare schemes in India are small in size, per head wise if you distribute, and strictly targeted. Whereas the Telangana schemes are big in size. Per head, there is something like some programs helping them 700,000 rupees, which is big amount, or per year 25,000 rupees. Rupees, if you see, it is in dollar terms. Maybe it is 70 rupees per dollar is the market exchange rate. Actually, purchasing power parity wise, it is something like 18 rupees. That is 18 rupees is equal to $1 in purchasing power parity wise. The amounts you can calculate yourself. These Telangana, as I said, Telangana schemes are replicated by different places. Some of the important schemes can be categorized in cash transfers with minimum conditions. This I will explain. One is Asra pensions. It is basically pension scheme. Unemployment allowances. Raitu Bandhu. Raitu Bandhu means Raitu is basically it is a farmer word. Raitu is a farmer. Farmer's friend or farmer's relative kind of, that is a scheme. Supporter, that is a Raitu Bandhu. Bima is an insurance scheme, life insurance scheme. In India, so many farmers have committed at least last 15 years, about 300,000 farmers have committed suicide. This is the biggest calamity human beings have ever experienced. This man, that is at least 300,000 or 3 million farmers have committed suicide. That is this government has provided, even for suicides, there is an insurance provision was provided by the government here. Then there is a marriage assistance program, the scholarships. These are relatively minimum conditions are there for this. There are few other schemes where some long processes are there. This is medical assistance scheme, which is known as KCR kit. Farm loan waiver scheme is there. Economic assistance is also another program where some conditions, long process has to be followed by the beneficiaries. In kind, there is a few schemes. One is the 2-bedroom houses, the sheep distribution, 3-acre land distribution, Mission Bhagirath providing every household tapped drinking water, which is ambitious. ICDS, PDS, integrated child development schemes. Then there is a public distribution system again. This Narega and there's a program guy is talking about this. These are some programs. Some of if I can't explain all these things in the given small time. Some important schemes I will explain and issues and challenges in implementation and design of some of these programs and impact. I will show you. This pension scheme is the most popular scheme in this. This government has got it. These pensions used to be in 2004. Up to 2004, it used to be 200 rupees. When this 10 years, it remained as it is, that figure was. In 2014, when this new state was formed, a new government came, the amount was raised to 1,000 rupees. Overnight, the chief minister became a god in this state. Everybody appreciating. It was given to about 4 million people. This all together, this is old age pensions, there is a widow pensions, there is some related other vulnerable sections, pensions were there. All of a sudden, he became a god, semi-god kind of entity in the state. Everybody was so happy with their... then the government also felt very happy. It started moving towards seeing this feedback and appreciation from it is getting. It is start implementing other programs, mostly in cash transfers. That is then there is some issues also. These pensions were paid with 1-2 months delays also sometimes. That is because of cash flow problems. And another problem is this exclusion, chances of exclusion. It is, as we are discussing, it is not considered as a right. If you are an old person, you automatically don't get. If you are poor, you automatically don't get it. You have to prove it. You are poor, or you are a particular caste person, you are this difficult. At times, many poor and ignorant people may not be proved that establish their credentials and get this. That is the one chances of one lack in this scheme. Otherwise, it's a good scheme. It is everybody implemented properly and everybody was happy. It also good tradition of implementing in the state for us other years also. But the main change is the amount was made it substantial from the nominal amount to the substantial amount. 1,000 rupees per month per a person in this state, in this country is a good amount. to sustain and survive, to live a decent life. Next, please. Then, as I said, it is farmers' investment support and farmers' investment support and insurance. These are investment was provided at the rate of 4,000 rupees per acre. Acre is area of 4,000 square meters. 4,000 square meters acre. Per acre, that is the 4,000 rupees was given for one crop. If the farmer is taking 2 crops, it will be given 8,000 rupees per year. That is the money. As I said, the government is very happy with the kind of feedback it is getting from the cash transfer schemes. It has raised the amount within 2 years to 5,000 per crop per acre. Total beneficiaries identified. For that, it has checked all land records and upgraded all the land records and found there is 5.7 million people who own the agricultural land in this state. So all those people were made participant of this scheme. They are paid that money twice in a year, at the month of May and October, I think. October or around that, just before winter crops. Then the insurance scheme was also introduced subsequently. In that, the government pays complete premium at the rate of 2,200 rupees, 2,071 rupees for the farmer. Then the farmer, if the any uneventful disease of the farmer for any reason, including suicide, the family get 0.5 million rupees as a compensation. 0.5 million, 500,000 rupees. In this, 2.7 million farmers have registered at this moment. Next. Then there are some issues in this program, this scheme also. This, as per land ownership wise, the money is paid. If the one farmer owns only 1 acre, he will get 8,000 or 4,000 as per his crops. If another farmer who owns 10 acres will get 40,000 rupees per crop and 80,000 per regressive distribution was there. That is one of the problem, you can say whether it is a problem or issue. That is one issue. Then there are at least 35 to 40% farmers are tenant farmers who don't own the land, but they cultivate, take the land on the release and cultivate. But those farmers were excluded from this scheme. Then this giving the 5.7 million people farmers as assistance, is it justifiable? This, as per the census data, the most authentic data in this country, there were 3.15 million farmers or cultivators in this country in 2011. In 2001, 3.44 million farmers were there. Basically, it is reducing. If it is not growing just because of various reasons, because land limitation of the land size and other reasons, people are coming out of the farmers. So in this situation, giving 5.7 million people as a farmer's assistance is not justifiable, strictly speaking. There's a medical assistance was given for at the rate of 12,000 per pregnant woman over a period of 1 year of different. There's a big process is involved. The issues here is in the previously also we have similar program, but the results were not encouraging. Even this program was recently launched. The results have to be analyzed after some time. We will The past data is not showing, past experience not encouraging this. There is a two-by in-kind, this is one of important in-kind subsidy program where the government want to give about 2.27 million houses freely, two-bedroom houses. But because it was not able to ground it because the contractors are not able to, not coming forward because there are no low margins. It is not able to implement it. These are the last two slides I will come to. The cash transfer are easy to administrate and getting positive feedback. Government is increasing the outlays. The in-kind subsidies and transfers are not only difficult to administer, but also involve certain risks. In case orchids, as I said, it is forcing the people to go to the government hospitals. It is a risk involved. Then the outcomes are not satisfactory. Old data it is showing it is outcomes are not satisfactory. Even cash transfers are certain issues. The Rise Bandhu targeting was not one issue. There is some side effects. Loan waivers is disturbing the credit atmosphere in this country. That is credit to. Then paternalism is there. You have to prove yourself. The government will decide whether to give the. It is not considered as a right. Then the pure UBI, as we know this, with the 6 essential ingredients, is way forward as a good opportunity in India to Indians to unleash their potentials. But the money required, given the population size, some broad targeting is required. We already discussed. I support just giving to women because of 2 reasons. Women, is the Indian system is a very strong family system. So if you give the women, it's automatically men also get benefited. Women are discriminated from the womb itself. Then you can at least alternative give in rural areas where the rural areas are migrating, the able-bodied people are migrating towards cities. The rural economy is shrinking. Urban areas have so many problems of pollution, other problems, environmental problems. This can be addressed by this. Then there is, with the UBI, there is a government structure has to be changed from provider to the regulator. We should not, that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bhaskar. I think this panel gave you a sample of how fascinating the debate in India is and the kaleidoscope of the debate in India. Now, we started half an hour late, so we will have time for questions from you. We'll open it for questions.
Yes, I have one question that is directly connected to the first talk we heard today and to what we just heard, which is this: does the panel believe that the most promising scale at which we could move towards a basic income is the level of the union as a whole, or at the level of individual states? Because the first presentation this morning indicated how Sikkim could go forward, and the argument that was that more regional autonomy would make that possible. And also in the last talk we heard how the basic pension, for example, the non-contributive pension had been increased significantly in Telangana, whereas there is a lot of lack of confidence in the national government, for example, in the case of the pensions, because the nominal level of 2006, if I remember correctly, is still the level at which it is today. So my question to you is, the move forward in India, should it be at the level of individual states? Is that the most promising way, or should action be taken mainly at the level of the union?
So what I understand from your question is that who should be giving the universal basic income? The provinces, which is a word that's used for the next panel, which is so colonial in itself, or it should be the central government. Now, after the GST, we have a single taxation in the country that's been implemented. And so what is happening is that the central government is compensating for all the states agreeing to a single tax for the next 3 years, 2.5 years already done. After that, states in South India will have excess resources to fund their own schemes. But there will be many states in North India which will not have money to fund their own schemes and will expect the central government to give the money. At the same time, by around 2025, I think, there will be a reorganization of parliamentary constituencies in the country. And because of the high population growth in North India, all the number of seats, parliamentary seats in North India will increase vis-a-vis seats in South India. So all the financial powers and the strength will be with South India, and all the political power with more political strength will be in North India. So it will be an interesting situation. And also what will happen is states will agree to central government giving a UBI, but if the central government was to come with a scheme where they would say the states would have to give 50% of the resources, I think so it's going to create a lot of problems, and some states do not have the bandwidth to do that beyond 2022.
Let me just add in response to Philippe. In India, there are federal schemes and there are state schemes. And the result is that we commissioned somebody to just prepare a list of all the schemes that they could identify. And it went into well over 3,000 schemes. Most of those schemes only operate within a single state. And one could imagine that an enlightened state government could amalgamate many of those schemes, which they involve expenditure, but they don't reach anybody significantly, and they could operate a form of movement towards a basic income within the state. That's why Sikkim would be an option that could be moved. So I think that my prediction would be that you're going to see state action before you see national action, but it would require the national government at least to take a tolerant attitude to experimentation at state level.
Thank you very much. This is Rajendra Deshpande, and I am a researcher in Gandhian thought. My question is to Dr. Shiva Kumar. Everybody, all of the speakers have mentioned the phenomenal growth India has had. But as is quite evident, this growth is skewed and it has produced inequality, and the most significant impact of this growth, which can be observed, is through Human Development Index. Human Development Index, in spite of this phenomenal growth, is almost at the same level as it was. So, minimum basic income, can we predict how much of impact can it bring on the human development ranking of India? Is there any study like this?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think when you talk about the Human Development Index, we must recognize that it's an average. And what we're really interested in is not pushing the average up, but in really uplifting the living standards of the poor. And I think that is the purpose of the basic income grant. So I would actually then look for disaggregated data, not just the Human Development Index and what it is doing, and to construct some indicators of well-being for populations that are at that low level of income. And one of the indicators which so I don't know about the MPI, Human Development Index, but an indicator that will definitely pick up progress and the positive impacts of the basic income would be the Multidimensional Poverty Index. The Multidimensional Poverty Index actually picks up dimensions of indicators relating to health, education, and basic standards of living. So it's a composite indicator. And if at all we are talking about what economic growth has achieved for India, there is almost about 200, 300 million people have been pushed up away out of the multidimensional poverty in the last 15 years. So that would be the indicator I would track at a disaggregated level by communities.
My name's Paul Harnett from World Basic Income. And Ajay mentioned Aadhaar, the ID system here in India, which has got fantastic coverage. And I was excited when I first heard about Aadhaar because you could facilitate a basic income here in India. But since I first heard about it, there are great concerns that it could be used in kind of big brother ways here in India. And I'd like to hear what some of the panel might think about the advantages and disadvantages of Aadhaar.
I think Aadhaar is necessary. Lots of people, like I initially said, what do the Chinese believe and what does the Western philosophy believe on individual rights and privacy or the greatest good? I think Aadhaar will be required. And one basic question that even when I am advising my state in Punjab is on data, is what do you do with data? I think so governments do not have the capacity to keep it safe because it'll definitely get stolen by corruption. It'll definitely be shared. It's already happening. And even in the private sector, I think so data is not safe because when employees leave particular companies, when they go to different companies, they take the data with them. I think so higher salaries that in a lot of positions people get in the private sectors because they get the information of the companies they own, they work for. So on this privacy issue, I think so it's going to be a problem and we've got to learn to live with it. But I think it's required. Otherwise, a lot of targeting and universality will not work. And second thing about Aadhaar is we have now too many cards in India. We have some place you have an Aadhaar, you have a ration card, you have a voter card, you have a driving license, and it goes on and on. So at some stage, I think so all these cards are going to converge very soon in a few years, and you may have a single identification which works for a lot of different activities.
I wanted to say something on Aadhaar, which is that the pre-Aadhaar time, a lot of, or most of the poor women who are our members did not have any identity. So if you asked, what kind of identity card do you have, maybe they had a voter's card, but beyond that, they had no identity at all. And Aadhaar has given them an identity. So I think that has been a huge benefit of Aadhaar. There is this issue of privacy. For most of our members, or the people, most of their data is not private. They don't have any data, and it's never been private. People live in a community, in a village, so it's never been private. But there is this fear that if government gets hold of data and has some policies that may not be beneficial for certain groups of people, then they can use the Aadhaar data. But they could have used a lot of other data, as Ajay Jakhar just said. There's the voters' IDs, there's the driving license IDs. So I think on balance, it has been a great boon.
Those of you who are not familiar with Aadhaar, I mean, it's giving every Indian a unique identification number, and it's being rolled out across the country. I think one of the lessons that's relevant for the basic income debate is it's proved that this sort of technological rollout can be done in India and be done very effectively, remarkably, given what people see with the rural character of the country and the urban slums, etc. And it's very instructive for us because when we began the pilot, one of the complaints was that people wouldn't be able to get the cash and you wouldn't be able to reach people and they wouldn't be able to pick it up. And we got a 96% response rate having the basic income within 2 months. It is possible to roll out these schemes, and that's very encouraging for those of us who favor basic income in India.
We have another, it's not related to basic income, but the government of India is just finishing an Aadhaar-like thing for cattle. Now every cattle in India, every cow and buffalo, every goat and pig and sheep has a 12-digit number. And this survey from house to house has taken telephone numbers of farmers, number of cattle, and given a number, and the survey was done on a tab for the first time on a handheld tablet. So I think the potential of using data is huge, and this is for the first time in the history that so much data is being collected. And as a farmer, we are saying we can use that data to give extension services, primary healthcare to animals. So I'm definitely Aadhaar would be a fantastic thing.
Ajay, a quick question. With human beings, they're doing biometrics. What do they do with a cow? Sorry about that. They ask what? They ask the farmer if this is... Okay. No, okay, let's...
No, go ahead, please.
No, I just want to respond to your question. There are serious concerns of data privacy and misuse of data, and I think we have to put that on the table. The other side, the government pushes that aside, or people who don't believe in it, on the grounds that introducing the single unique identity number prevents a lot of double counting, leakage, wastage. So if you look at the public distribution system, the same fellow might be having 5 ration cards and drawing 5 times that quantity. All that leakage has been plugged. Hats off to all that, and we have the technical competencies and capacities to do it. But what is happening is that in the pursuit of technical efficiency and managerial efficiency, the broader picture of what it is you're supposed to do goes out. So under the National Food Security Act, which is supposed to ensure nutritional well-being and promote nutrition, the success of the state is in establishing an absolutely incorruptible public distribution system. So they know who's taking the food, they know from point to point, geometric monitoring, etc. But what is it doing to the nutrition level of children over there? No studies have been done. So while there's the instrumentality of Aadhaar is fine in one sense, it's an efficiency point, but the ultimate goal is to improve child undernutrition, and that is not happening.
Okay, there was a lady at the back, then Eduardo, then Shikaben.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Min, and I'm from Oroville. The question is to the entire panel there. I was wondering how strict this idea of unconditional is to the panel and to all of us, considering we are facing this imminent environmental challenge, and whether ecological services would be a good way to connect a basic income. Just a simple question.
Yeah, let's take 2 more questions and then we'll have...
Mine is not really a question, but my anxiety. Given the fact that this is a direct transfer of cash to people, so there are no intermediaries and no, that's what I understand by basic income. It's not like other schemes. But the anxiety is this should not become like another scheme. The second thing is, given the fact that in 3 states the Congress government has won, because of, as you said, because of this scheme, because they had it in their manifesto. If they have won in 3 states, will they be able to implement? The other thing is, given the fact that we have a government at the center which is bent upon capturing the southern states also, suppose they say that we are going to have, in the next elections, if they say that we are going to have basic income, universal basic income, and want to implement, there's every likelihood they'll come back to power. In any case, they are likely to come back to power, but this will be really something that will bring them back to power. Then what will be the consequences of that kind of power that it will have? Because it is, right now, you know, if you look at the social and political consequences of what is happening and the way federalism is going, federal structures are being tampered with, we don't know how the central government this party is going to, what it is going to do, what will be the consequences of accepting basic income, universal basic income, and if it promises to implement it. I'm just worried about that. But as far as basic income is concerned, of course it is one of the best things that one can think about. But I'm also thinking about the political and social consequences of that kind of thing.
Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Rama Melkote, retired professor from the university. I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't understand.
Eduardo, Shikaben, and Ranjani.
I'm learning so much from all of you. Well, in 2005, I visited Harvard University in the first lecture by Philip Van Parijs and perhaps the most brilliant Indian economist, Amartya Sen, Justice and Institutions. And he started to say, in this course, we will see to what extent the basic income, as argued by Philippe Van Parijs, Eduardo Suplicy, will or not increase the level of justice in society. 3 years ago, I went to Harvard University, had lunch with Amartya Sen, and we discussed a little bit about the basic income. And he said, well, in India right now, I'm not so sure that we should have a basic income because we still don't have, for example, health services to the whole population, and perhaps we should first have the health, a good health assistance to all. But anyway, he continues to be one of the most enthusiasts for the basic income, as we can see from the presentation in the cover of Philippe Van Parijs and Yannick van der Voort, basic income, a radical reform for a free society and a sane economy. He recommends so much enthusiastic for all of us to read Philippe and Yannick books. So, do you believe that can we combine the needs to have universal good health assistance and a basic income in the following years? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Would you like to respond to that? Shikaben.
I just only want to correct Mr. Ajay. This is not the Aadhaar number for the animal. There is one scheme in India that is Primary Pashu Bima Yojana. That's why the government have one number for the animal who take the insurance for the animal from the Gram Panchayat, and they just put the mark on the R, and that is that number, not the Aadhaar number.
Well, I said there's a similar number now you're giving to each animal. Yes, over and above the insurance number.
Yeah.
Because I'm handling Punjab and I know that they're going house to house doing it. So it is not Aadhaar, but it's a similar number I was just saying for animals.
Thank you for an excellent plenary. My questions are, one is, we are talking about a universal basic income, and already there is widow pension, disability pension, and transfer for pregnant women. So when we say about universal basic income, it cannot displace that, because there is an added disadvantage faced by the differently able, by the elderly, by pregnant women. They're anemic. Yeah, anemia levels are high. So by treating everybody same, are we discriminating against these people? So that is number one to mull about. Number two, we say that let us, some of the welfare schemes, there is highly corrupt. Health education is absolutely necessary. But I would like to say that we need to weigh each scheme, the pros and cons. For example, there are some collective empowerment spaces and schemes for women. The self-help groups, women's empowerment, the Women's Development Corporation, NRLM, etc. Now, basic income only gives individual transfer, does not bring. So we cannot subsume all schemes under the basic income. We need to think through carefully about this. Thank you.
Okay, let's have some responses from the panelists.
Who would like to take?
Answer to this Aravallu friend from Aravallu. Basically, your concern is the environmental impact of this basic income. I feel it is a much more benign than many other schemes we are running. For example, I can easily say this fertilizer subsidy. This state has 1.5 times more than recommended doses of fertilizer being applied in this state. I have the evidence in this. At the same time, this the food security also, public distribution system also. We are producing rice and wheat, resource-intensive crops, and distributing all, collecting some places, few places, and distributing across the state, country. From all the way from the Punjab to Kerala, you are transporting how much it is environmental impact it is. This has removed all the local production systems. Crops have gone. At this moment, people are suffering. Rich people are again going old millets and crops are consuming. This is a benign, I feel. If you have the chance to the individuals, it is benign results can be obtained. That's all. Thank you.
So I think your question was that is there enough money for ecosystem services if you were to do basic income? So that's what ecosystem services...
The environment would be a better option, is what I'm saying.
That's what in my, when I spoke, I said that we need to repurpose agriculture subsidies in a way that they provide for ecosystem services. But the question is there enough money for everything? And that's open to debate. But there was another question, if 3 Congress rule states are going to be implementing universal income, I think not. If they last 5 years, which is again doubtful, because 1 is already gone, 2 are on the way out. And I don't think so they will do it because they have promised farm loan waivers, which they are not able to finance anyway. And trying to get over it, that they're increasing the exclusion criteria, so less and less people get it. So I don't think so that's also going to be happening anytime soon.
Yeah, let me just quickly respond to each question. On the first one, I think basic income and the linkages with ecological change, which I heard mentioned in your comment, I think is something that we should be spending a lot more time. And in our pilots in Madhya Pradesh, some of the findings actually relate very much to environmental issues. We saw an improvement in sanitation, building of latrines, and in sort of start-up of water preservation issues and so on, which I think in our analysis, in retrospect, we should have amplified. But I think this subject is something that's really important. On the second question from Rama, if I understood, I think one of the things that came out of our conference in Delhi that we had after the pilots, one of the arguments we were presenting is that if you were rolling out basic income, be it in Sikkim or wherever, that it would be very good to get an independent intermediary institution or organization, be it SEWA, be it any NGO, that could help in the rollout, so to help with people getting take-up, better education, not being exploited by middlemen and so on. And I think that would be a very important part of an agenda in India. Eduardo's point is one we've heard before, as he knows. I don't agree with Amartya Sen on this, because what we have seen is if you get cash in people's pockets, they get their basic income, they start improving their health the same week. They start improving the health of their children the same week. They start going to better healthcare providers the same week. It's something that changes the dynamic in a community. To wait until you've got institutions at national level that are world class, that can deliver healthcare, education and everything, of course they're needed. Of course they're needed. But they're not substitutes. We need to see a social state being built in India. But people are dying and suffering from morbidity this week. And a basic income, as we saw, we witnessed, has effects on health and nutrition and healthcare and practices that has multiplier effects and reduces healthcare costs because it improves the health and therefore reduces need for medical treatment. So the dynamics of helping people directly is quite different from building an institutional structure, which of course is needed, but the things are not substitutes. And the last thing is that the lady who spoke at the end, none of us in the basic income movement believe that a basic income is a panacea or that should replace everything else. None of us believe that, unless you're mad, okay? We believe that you need supplements for disability, for pregnancy, for childhood, for frail old age, for various contingency needs that people have. But they should be based on needs, not on incomes. They should be based on a woman needs those treatments, etc. And I think that you can build a basic income scheme with supplements based on needs that is much more equitable and more efficient.
Can we finish?
Now, I believe that Amartya Sen is coming to your opinion, because when he says so many good things about the last book of Philip Van Parijs and Yannick van der Voort, I think that he is becoming more and more convinced of your arguments. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Okay. I think you'll get for these questions, you'll get many different views. But I'd like to start with saying that basic income is not a panacea. It's not a solution for everything. It is something that has to be nested in a variety of many different social security and human rights policies. So, like we said, medical, universal healthcare and universal education is a must if there's to be basic income. And then I come directly to the point that Eduardo raised and that Guy also raised. As SEVA, we are part of the universal health campaign, and we are also part of the basic income campaign. But I do not agree, and I think I heard Eduardo say that let there be first universal health and a good state health system, and then we should think about basic income, but I don't think you can do it that way, because campaigns and policies come at their own time. So you can't wait for a policy to fructify and then you talk about, now I'll think about basic income. By then, everyone will have forgotten about basic income. So if basic income is going forward and we keep trying for the universal health coverage, then I think you can't put one after the other. So I would not really agree with that approach. Also, you asked about the elites. I think the elites would be more ready for basic income than they are for universal health coverage, because in India, the private medical fraternity is extremely strong, and it is a very high-earning, high-profit sector. I'll hand it over to you on that very topic. Shiva Kumar is a health expert, so he has a lot to say on that. I just want to address the ecological issue. I want to say firmly that while ecological issue, and especially climate change, is a very important area, I do not think that everything should be put into basic income. And a conditional, anything that becomes conditional when you talk about basic income immediately reduces the effectiveness of basic income. So parallel, but not conditional. I think Ranjani's point, was it Ranjani's point? Yes. On what to keep and what not to keep, what should be continued and what should not be continued. I think that's exactly the areas that we should be talking about. what are the schemes that we should not be having, what are the things that should continue, and what is to be compensated. So, for example, we just heard from Guy that Narega should not continue, but then we'd hear from Shiva Kumar that Narega should continue. So that discussion needs to be done. So, one doesn't have a solution, but I think that is the Indian debate must go in that direction. And finally, Rama's point about the worry, but rather than the worry, I want to say something on the Congress victories in the states, Rajasthan MP. They didn't talk about basic income at that point. The big promise was loan waivers, not basic income. And this is now my own opinion, but I think when the Congress party brought up Nyay, which means justice for basic income, it was not brought down to the ground. For example, in my own state in Gujarat, the whole thing was never even translated into Gujarati. So I think had it really reached the main population, it would have had a bigger impact. I think it didn't have impact because people didn't really hear about it.
Thank you. I sort of taking up what Eduardo said, completely endorse what Renana is saying, that the demand for universal basic income should go hand in hand with the demand for ensuring universal access to health and basic social services. And if you push for one without simultaneously arguing for the other, there is the danger, and I will really say there's a danger, particularly with this government, of falling into the hands of a very strange situation where there is no conversation on poverty, there is no conversation on healthcare, there is very little conversation on improving the quality of education, much less investments. In fact, if you look at the public spending on health and education by this government over the last 5-6 years, it's either stagnant. In fact, even in this new budget, we see very little allocations for basic education and basic primary health care, basic child care, and so on. It's also a danger because when Guy Standing says that, when I get money in my hands, I'll go and access private health care, the quality of that private health care is hugely suspect. But it helps fall into the hands of this government, which believes in privatization. It believes, in fact, India has the most privatized healthcare system in the world today. If at all our health conditions are so bad, it's not because of a bad public sector. It is because you cannot be more privatized than what we have in India today. And even the poorest of the poor, 60-70% of them are accessing private healthcare. So, Guy, we can push them to access even more private healthcare with some expectation that they'll improve their health status. I don't believe at all, because no country in the world has been able to achieve any semblance of universal good quality healthcare or good quality education by depending so heavily on a private sector. So I think with that, I would just end by saying that yes, unless we push simultaneously, and that is where the challenge is, that this government can easily grab the baton on universal basic income and do nothing about pushing for universal access to good quality healthcare and education, because the obligation is now, in fact, it's an abdication of their responsibility. We have given you the money, go and get the best private healthcare you can, private education you can in the world.
Thank you, all the panelists, and thank you for your questions. I think, as Renana said, that I think basic income is not a panacea, and it is not going to solve all the problems. It is not a magic bullet. What it does is it interrogates the current system that we have. It opens a conversation about many, many things about the society, the kind of society we live in. So I think to that extent, I think basic income in India has started a huge conversation. I think there are several players now actively supporting it, actively opposing it. And so that is the whole good thing about the Indian debate. Thank you so much.